Is the humble climbing bike dead? Well, if you've been reading the press for the last year or so, you'd certainly think it was on its way out. And if you've been following the men's pro tour, it certainly had its day in that group. But does that really matter to the rest of us? I'm going to review the Cervelo R5 and try to work that out for you. So this was launched last year at the tour. So this is the 5th generation of this bike, and it was launched with quite a big fanfare, but to be honest, none of the riders really rode it. A few of the domestiques rode it, a few of the climbing domestiques, but it really didn't get the kind of attention it probably should deserve until Pauline Ferrand-Prévot won the Queen stage of the women's tour on one of these bikes. Now, obviously, a lot of that is down to her fantastic climbing ability and not just the bike, but it was quite unusual that that was the only real race stage that it's had and had since, to be honest. What I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to review this bike. I'm going to go through all the details you need, the spec, the frame, all of those kind of things. And I'm going to ride it on the beautiful roads around here. Now, it's not been this sunny and bright all year long, but, you know, this is beautiful Shrinesmore, just to the west of Sheffield. And it's the perfect place to test a bike like this, which is designed mainly for going uphill. So, let's get into the details and let's just see if a climbing bike is still relevant. So, what is the Cervelo R5? Well, it's the Canadian brand's climbing bike, and it's the bike in their range with the most heritage. So this range is actually over 20 years old. So this is the 5th generation of this bike. It's been around for a long time, and in that time, it's won countless Grand Tour stages, Grand Tour overalls, mountain stages, cobble classics, you name it. It's been used in one format or another, and it was always the go-to race bike from Cervelo. But the S series has surpassed that. With the ever-increasing pro speeds, you know, the aero advantage of the S5 is just too much to ignore. And in fact, barely anyone rides this in the Pro Tour, which kind of begs the question, what's it for? So, this version's super light. This is 6.5 kilos out of the box in a 54, which is quite frankly bonkers. And to do that, they've made some compromises. So, super light handlebars, super light wheels, and a new tube profile on here, which is less aerodynamic and far skinnier than previous versions, which, you know, all gets it down to that super low weight. Now, in regards to the weight, you might be forgiven for thinking it doesn't really matter anymore because the pro guys don't really pay as much attention to it. But what is worth remembering is the pro guys ride at significantly higher speeds than you or I ever do. Probably higher than you realise. So most Pro Tour riders are going uphill at 22, 24 kilometres an hour plus, which is bonkers. Like, that is an insane speed to be going uphill, and at that speed the aero advantage is significant, especially when you consider you can get an aero bike down to just over 7 kilos, so the weight difference isn't really that much either. But for the rest of us who don't ride at Pro Tour speeds, actually a lighter bike makes a bigger difference on inclines. You know, at that speed there isn't as much of an aero benefit, so we would in fact be better served with a lighter bike like this. And there's also a few other benefits with a climbing bike that I think are sometimes forgotten. And one of them being the ride quality, because it's got narrower tube profiles and, you know, it doesn't have the big blocky head tubes and all that kind of stuff that you get on aero bikes. They actually tend to be far more comfortable, which means they're generally a nicer place to ride for the rest of us that aren't racing for a living. So we're going to get into some of the details on this. We're going to get into the details on the frame, and the rest of the spec. And, yeah, let's get into it. So, first things first, let's get into the frame tech. So, from a distance, you know, it still looks very much like an R5, but it still has that kind of classic road silhouette of classic slim tube profiles, and it's a very good, clean looking bike. Overall, all of the tubes are much slimmer, and particularly the down tube. So this uses what's referred to as a squoval tube profile, which is Cervelo marketing chat for a square oval tube. This is less pronounced than previous generations. So the earlier version of this was much bigger and it had a more pronounced point on here, which is more aerodynamic. This one, again, you know, as I said, is slimmer to keep the weight down, and that's paired to a really nice slim straight bladed fork, which pairs into this really beautifully done head tube area. Now, this isn't the sort of thing you'd notice on most bikes, but I think Cervelo deserves some praise here. Most brands use other people's headsets, so be that FSA, Acor, Cane Creek, whoever, and they spec them, they fit them aftermarket. This one is clearly one they've done themselves because it tapers in beautifully, so it's their own shape, and it looks like a true one piece, which I think is really nicely done, especially on, you know, kind of high-end bike like this. That kind of detail really finishes the bike off nicely. Fully internal cable routing, as you kind of expect on this level of bike. Nicely flattened off top tube, so plenty wide from the top. It doesn't look particularly skinny from there, but from the side profile, it's nice and flattened off. and that kind of swoops down beautifully into the kind of classic Cervelo R series stays. So these are super, super skinny. And the idea with that is that, you know, it kind of dampens a lot of the shock from the rear wheel. You know, the classic test with an R series is you can squeeze the stays in your hand, which is always a little bit disconcerting, but most of the stiffness is nearly all of the stiffness, in fact, is through the chain stays and the bottom bracket area. So they deliberately make this part of it super skinny, which kind of deflects a lot of the impact from the bottom. The bottom bracket on this is also worth a shout. So Cervelo use what's called BB Right, which is their own system, and in the past has had, you know, not always the best press, but I don't think people fully understand what it's for. So it uses a press fit bottom bracket, which, you know, is fairly standard for 30mm axles, but it's actually offset. So it's offset by 11mm. And what that does is it gives the engineers the maximum amount of room. So the bottom bracket is as wide as they can make it, but they also make the non-drive side chainstay much thicker as well. So there's only so wide you can make the drive side chainstay before it interferes with the chainring on a tyre. But the non-drive side, they've maximised the width. And the reason they've done that is just to increase the stiffness, which, you know, by making that area super stiff, you can then lose a lot of weight on this part here, which, you know, I think goes a long way to explaining how R series ride. You know, they are responsive and stiff and comfortable at the same time, which I think a lot of it's to do with that pairing. The other thing that really helps with the comfort on these bikes is these seat tubes. So this one's actually stiffer than previous generations. So for previous ones, especially in bigger sizes, had a tendency to be too flexy. This one's a little bit stiffer, a little bit lighter, and a general improvement. So it has the kind of classic D shape, which you see on, you know, plenty of other brands these days. And the idea with that is that not only is it slightly more aerodynamic, but it also flexes a little bit more, which gives you a bit more comfort. This doesn't have the kind of classic drop stays, which I really actually like. I think I like the silhouette of this. I like the kind of classic look of the chain stay kind of floating into the top tube. But with stays that skinny, you don't really need the drop stay, which is, you know, other brands do for comfort. So the geometry on the Cervelo R series is worth talking about, actually. So the ride geometry has stayed the same as previous generations. So the wheelbase is still 978. You know, trail figures are still the same. It's very, very close to a Specialized SL8, which is the kind of Pro Tour go-to benchmark for race bikes. But they have changed the fit geometry. So this now has the same fit as the Cervelo S series. So, reach of 383 and stack of 544, which means it's lower at the front essentially. Now I understand that from a Pro Tour perspective. You know, if the likes of Pauline Ferrand-Prévot, she wants to go from an R series to an S series. There's no changes in geometry, so that makes perfect sense for pro racers. But for the rest of us, I don't know if that's such a great idea. One of the things that the R series was always good for was being an everyday race bike. And the argument used to be that, you know, they sold bikes to bike riders, not to pro racers. And this kind of flies in the face of that a little bit. I mean, it's not unrideably aggressive. It's, you know, it is pretty comfortable, but it is lower. And, part of me wonders whether by doing that, it's lost a little bit of the shine that the original R series had. So one of the ways Cervelo saved weight on the R series is with this new handlebar, which is the HB18, which is a snappily titled new one-piece cockpit. So on the 54 here, I've got here, it's 38 centimeters from center to center with a 100mm stem, which is, you know, fairly standard. It's a good width, actually. It's narrow enough to still feel fast, but not so narrow that I feel constricted on climbs, which is where this bike's designed to excel. So that's nice. And like I say, I know Cervelo in the past have always spent a lot of time on ergonomics of handlebars, and it shows with this. One thing that I really like is that it has a 3-degree back sweep, which is only marginal, but it's helpful. So what that does is when you're on the tops, it gives you a much more natural wrist angle. If you put your hand out flat, it isn't, you don't hold a bar straight, you hold it at an angle. And this works really well with that. I find it super comfy for long climbs. It's got a really nice transition to the levers as well. So squared off, so there's like a shorter gap here. So it gives you plenty of room and maximum width on the tops. And not too long in the reach, not too deep in the drops either. The kind of classic FSA, shallow, ergo, whichever you want to call it, but a kind of de rigueur standard drop these days. And these are fantastic, so really comfortable. You get a smidgen of flex from them on when you're really, really pulling on the bars, but you only really notice that on super steep inclines. So, you know, there's a climb near me here that's super steep, and, you know, I was kind of averaging 800 plus watts on it, and you can feel the bar move ever so slightly, but it's marginal. It's a really, you know, it's not the sort of thing you notice on most rides, and only in the very extremes do you feel it. But I also don't really think it's much of a problem. That extra little bit of flex actually, I think, gives it a softness that adds to the comfort. So one of the big reasons for that headline weight loss on the R5 are these new wheels from Reserve, which are snappily titled 34 and 37. So it's got 34mm front rim and a 37 rear with a 22 and a 22.8 internal, which is perfect for the kind of 30mm tyres I've got fitted here. They're very light. They come in at 1220 grams, 24 spokes front and rear, but they've got some features on here that are really good for end users. So the DT Swiss 240 hub, which I'm really glad to see. Big fan of DT hubs. Serviceable, lasts forever, super smooth, all of those things. You know, can't go wrong with those. But they also have external nipples. So these are going to be easy to service and easy to shop should you have any problems. And they have a reinforced spoke hold as well, which something you can't see, but does mean you get a stronger rim. And speaking of strength and longevity, they've got a lifetime warranty on these as well, which is great to see. So some other brands do that too, but it's on a high-end product. It's always good to see that's, you know, that a brand has got enough confidence to offer a lifetime warranty. Like I say, they're light. They're not quite stiff as my general test wheel, my DT Swiss ERC 1400s, but they're not as deep, so you wouldn't expect them to be. But they're plenty stiff enough, and their low mass kind of really is really noticeable when you're riding. So they accelerate really quickly. And like I say, a nice comfortable ride as well. That kind of extra softness I think really plays well with the characteristics of this bike. Has a shallow wheel, no issues with crosswinds, they're nice and wide, and yeah, great looking wheel I think. At £8.5 the R5 is not what you'd call cheap, but it is comparatively good value compared to other bikes in the kind of same realm. So the first two that really come to mind are the Specialized Athos 2 Pro, which comes in at 7,249, so that's a bit cheaper. Really similar bike, so same kind of climbing aspirations, round tube profiles, same SRAM Force build, and that comes with a Roval Alpinist cockpit and wheels, and it's basically the same weight, so that comes in at 6.7 kilo, although the frame is slightly heavier and Specialized, so in theory you can build an R5 lighter. The other bike that kind of comes to mind is a Scott Addict RC Team, and that's cheaper again. That comes in at 6,899, and that has a similar idea. So slightly more aerodynamic than the other two, but similar idea of being lightweight. It comes in at 7 kilos, has light wheels, and a one-piece carbon bar and stem. And they're both, you know, pretty good mainstream options. The other one that kind of came to mind was a Factor 02 VAM, which is kind of a bit more left field, and they don't really do a direct comparison, so you can't just order a SRAM Force Factor, but they do a custom build option, and if you use their custom build facility on their website, it comes up at £10,300 for a similar build. So that would be with SRAM Force, shallow wheels, one-piece bar and stem, and all those kind of things. So, you know, when you look at the Factor, the Cervelo does look good value. But the one bike that really kind of made me think that the Cervelo is good value was the BMC Team Machine SLR, which I sometimes struggle to say, while I was saying it slowly, which was an amazing bike. I reviewed that for Cycling Weekly, and I did absolutely love it, but it was £13,000, which is a lot of money for a bike. And the Cervelo was lighter. So, you know, if weight is the key thing for you, that's, you know, like the R5 is really hard to beat, and I would say it actually had a better all-round ride. The BMC was certainly stiffer and more responsive, but as a bike to be on all day, I'd be much happier on the Cervelo. So yeah, like I say, £8.5, not cheap, but relatively good value. And if you say it quick enough, it doesn't sound that expensive. So on to the important stuff then. How does this ride, and does it still feel like a Cervelo R series? Well, yes and no. So, like I said earlier, I've ridden a lot of Cervelo R series bikes, and I'd always used to describe them as the kind of Goldilocks of the Cervelo range. They were always just right, never too stiff, not too light, not too heavy, you know, just right for most riding, and this is pretty much there. The only, excuse the wind, I'm going downhill, so you'll probably not hear me. There we go. Back to slow speeds of going uphill. Anyway, as I was saying, this is nearly there, nearly there. It's, in a lot of ways, it feels just like the R series. So it's very planted, it's comfortable, it's smooth, it glides along beautifully, and it's responsive. So, you know, that low mass does mean it accelerates quickly, especially on steeper inclines, even with me on board. It's a very, very good bike at what it's designed for. So if you're going uphill, it's excellent, but it does feel different to kind of other climbing bikes in the category. So the bike I'm going to probably compare it most to would be the BMC. I spent quite a lot of time on that as well this winter, and they're very similar in terms of weight. This is lighter, but they're not far apart. But this feels softer. I wouldn't say in a bad way, it just feels more muted, like more of a damped and comfortable ride. The BMC was very, very stiff. This is less so. It doesn't feel like I'm losing anything, but it definitely has a softer feel to it, which I actually really like. You know, when it came, it arrived with 26mm tyres, which were very fast, but like all tyres, they were only fast when they had air in them. They were really quite fragile, and a bit of a race-only product, something I'm not massively keen on. Changed out to the 30mm Vittoria Corsas, which are excellent, and it really kind of transformed the character of this bike, kind of gave it an even softer edge, which might sound like it's slow, but it's really not. It's a very comfortable bike to ride, but it's very quick. You know, when you get out of the saddle like I am now, it's an instant response. You don't feel like you're dragging it up the hill at all. It's a very, very addictive feeling when you're riding uphill. Very impressive. My only, well, the two criticisms, one the tyres, but the second one is the geometry. I feel like they've missed a trick by making the stack as short as they have on this. It doesn't hinder me too much, it fits me fine, but I think they're limiting the amount of people that would actually be comfortable on this bike, to cater for a few who don't actually use it, which strikes me as a bit odd. So like I said earlier in the video, the aggressive geometry on this is the same as the S series. The reason being that the pro guys and girls can swap between bikes, but as we know, they all just use the S5, which kind of makes this redundant for pro guys and girls. So I think the next generation of this bike should definitely go back to the original geometry with a slightly taller stack. I don't mean like, you know, endurance bike geometry. It doesn't need to be like a Caledonia, but a bit more would make it a more versatile offering. Outside of that, I think it's faultless. It's beautiful to ride, it really is. Whether it's coming out on a ride like this, on shrines more on some big hills, or group rides, or chain gangs, you know, I've done it on this winter, and I just love riding it, especially with the tyre change. You know, I feel that climbing bikes are sometimes missold. They're missold as these kind of performance items for going uphill for people who don't weigh much, which they're obviously very good at. But I kind of feel like they miss a trick, because a lot of those bikes actually just make fantastic road bikes. Not everyone cares about CDA and wind tunnels and all that jazz, has its place. So I'm just going out for a really nice ride. This does that really, really well. You know, it's all the things that I particularly like. So stiff and responsive, but not too stiff. Comfy, floats along. Just a really nice place to be. Handlebars on this are really good as well. Like I said, I do spend a lot of time with the ergonomics on these things, and it shows. It's a really nice shaped bar. It's kind of 3-degree angle, really key, makes them a nice place to be on the tops. 4 screw set on here, like every other 4 screw set I've ridden in the last 18 months. It's been brilliant, really think they've overtaken Shimano. Now the ergonomics are great, brakes work fantastic, gear ratios are great as well. You know, that 10 sprocket, and I've not used it that often because I'm not as quick as I'd like to think I am. It's great, wide range of gears, shifting's perfect, really is a brilliant group set. And the wheels have been a big surprise on this as well. Be easy to be cynical and just think they're a cost cutting exercise, but these are a genuine performance wheel set. You know, I normally ride a DT Swiss ERC 1400s as my kind of test wheel to kind of compare against. And these are as good, if not better. I'd say they're slightly more responsive in terms of weight, a little bit more flex I'd say, but not much. And they're very, very good wheels. And obviously having a DT Swiss hub means they'll last forever, which is good. And the lifetime warranty I think is a really, really nice touch. The thing I am glad Cervelo have kept is the riding geometry. So the original R series won lots of bike races for a reason. It's because it was one of the best handling bikes out there. That whole Goldilocks thing again, it was just planted. Thankfully this has kept that extra kind of suppleness and softness translates to grip. If you really push it, it handles beautifully, especially on stuff like this. You know, where it's a bit bumpy, a bit twisty, a bit gnarly, this bike really comes alive. I absolutely love cornering on this thing. I mean, these are pretty slow corners because they're blind on the exits and there's often water at the bottom, but it handles superbly, just like all the other R series stuff. Makes for a very addictive ride. Like I was saying before, I think climbing bikes often get pigeonholed into just going uphill fast. I think you're kind of missing one of the big selling points of this bike. It's how it handles and stuff like that. You know, I'm as guilty as the next man in media of kind of almost making modern bikes into maths equations. But you really can't beat properly sorted road bike for pinging in and out of corners. You know, this isn't as fast as the Argon I was riding, it's not as aero and all those things, but its feel in corners and its speed is fantastic. It's not as stable over 55k as the Argon, but no climbing bike I've ever ridden is. That bike really was exceptional at high speed, as are other aero bikes, but this has a real sensation of speed. When you're pushing on, it always feels fast, which is part of the battle really. I absolutely love it. You know, whether it's riding quickly in a group, pushing on your own, this feels every inch the race bike. And it's that character I think that really defines the R series. Going uphill fast is great. You can't beat nailing some corners. There's an overall package. This thing's brilliant. It's just a really good classic road bike that's really great fun to ride, which I know is kind of a bit of a boring evaluation, but just love getting out on it. And I still think my Goldilocks analogy works really well with this bike. It's just very good at lots of things.
So, what's my Velo expert verdict on the Cervelo R5? Well,
I absolutely love it. Now, I've ridden all sorts of R-Series bikes over the years, and this one has been my favourite so far, which I wasn't entirely sure that would be the case before I rode it. I was a little bit unsure and a little bit worried that they might have ruined the original character of the original R-Series, but it still retains a lot of those things. So the ride handling, the way it feels, it still feels like an R-Series, which is absolutely fantastic. You know, it corners beautifully, descends really well. It obviously climbs really well, as you'd expect for a bike at 6.5 kilos, but I kind of feel like that headline grabbing climbing ability is almost kind of missing the point with this bike. You know, with a small tyre change, it goes from being a very accomplished climbing bike to a fantastic all-round road bike, and one that I've really enjoyed riding, whether that's on, you know, big days out in the hills, short fast rides, chain gangs, group rides, you name it. I've absolutely loved riding it. It's not perfect. I feel like Cervelo have missed the trick with the geometry. I feel like making the geometry the same as the S-Series is a little bit limiting. It's not super aggressive, so you know, chances are it will still fit, but I think it's kind of blurred the lines a little bit, and I think it'd be better with the original geometry. I'm glad they've kept the ride geometry the same, because like I say, it handles fantastically, but I think it would benefit from a slightly taller stack. But it's worth checking out. I don't think it's super aggressive, so I think most people will still be okay, but I do think that's a bit of a missed opportunity, as is the way they've marketed it, to be honest. I think they've kind of just pigeonholing it as a climbing bike really misses what this bike's actually fantastic for, which is an all-round good road bike. You know, it's not cheap, but it is very well priced in its category. So at 8.5k, that's a lot of money, but comparatively for bikes of this weight, that is actually really well priced. And it's got a fantastic spec. You know, the wheels are good, the frame's brilliant, the fitting, the contact points are also fantastic. The bars are really comfortable, and you know, I really enjoy those. I really like the shape of the tops. I like the way that, you know, they flare back slightly, and the fact that they're nice and wide across the tops, despite only being 38mm wide, which is good. And you know, the Force group set. Do you know what? Every review I do, I think I comment on how fantastic the Force group set is, but it's brilliant. It's absolutely faultless, and it'd be the groups that I would choose. You know, there is a lighter SRAM red version of this, but I don't really see the benefit. You know, it's going to cost you a lot more for a few grams, and if that headline grabbing weight is important to you, then by all means go for it. But I think this particular build is utterly fantastic. So yeah, my final verdict on the R5, I absolutely love it, and I'll be pretty gutted to give it back. So I want to say thanks to the guys at Pond Bike for sorting this out for me. I really appreciate it. It's been a fantastic opportunity to ride it. I really like it. It's a beautiful bike to ride, and it still keeps the R5 character, which I think is probably the most important bit. So if you like this review and you want to see more stuff from me, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button below. And if you have any questions, pop them in the comments below. Cheers, guys.